Okay, in this video we're going to look at websites in a little bit more detail. We're going to learn the difference between a static website and a dynamic website, which we've already seen, but we're going to review that. We're going to learn what web servers are, application servers, and databases, and how they all work together when you're building dynamic websites. And we're also going to learn what the front end and the back end of a website are. Yeah, so let's get started. This is basically, right, kind of here's somebody browsing the web. This cloud often represents the internet. People often use a cloud to represent the internet. Here's a web server that has web pages on it. So this would be an example of a static web page, right? And a static web page is a web page that doesn't update. So every time you come back, it's exactly the same. And until the person who writes the web pages changes the web page, that web page will forever be the same. That's a static website. So the most basic level, this is kind of how a static website would work, right? Where there's just a web server and that's it, and it hosts the web pages. And when somebody wants to go to a certain domain, then the web server fulfills that request, and it will serve the web pages to whoever asked for it. And so what this would look like is this guy types in, let's say, mclouds.com, right? mclouds.com. And then mclouds.com goes to a DNS server, a domain name server, and that resolves to an IP address, which says go to this IP address, and that's a location on the web, and that would be the location of the web server hosting mclouds.com. And then this web server would say, you want which page? It would find that page and it'd get it, and then it'd send that page back to whoever asked for it. So that would be a static sort of arrangement for a static web page. A dynamic web page, the way that works, the kind of hardware that you have going on in that, the way that works, a dynamic web page is going to change every time you come back to it. So again, we saw these images before, but every time I hit refresh, new images pop up. Wow, that's because there's some programmable logic going on there. And for that to work, there has to be an application server. And so that's this is an example of an application server, right? And the way that works, same thing going here. But now the web server says, oh, you want a certain page with programming logic on it. The web server asks the application server for it. The application server processes whatever programming logic is on that page, hands it back to the web server, and then the web server serves that to the person who's asking for it. So we just kind of have another tier here. We've got the web server and we have the application server. And here's one more image of the same thing, which also includes the database, right? And so we have the client, we have the web server, we have the application server, and we have a database. And just ignore these other words here in firewall. Just look at these squares in the middle. Right. So that's basically what's happening. Client, web server, application server, database. And so each of those things are, they could be separate machines, or it could be software running on the same machine. So one machine could be running web server software, application server software, and also a database. And it's just three different pieces of software that work together to create dynamic websites. And so dynamic website is something that you can then update, right? So I could come in here and I could enter data or change data in the database. Examples of web servers. So these are the web servers that are out there on the market. Apache is the most common. It's open source. It's got 53% of the market. Microsoft has Internet Information Server, which has got 17% of the market. And then there are two others that have smaller market shares. And I imagine Google, right, will see this. We will see this rise. I'm not sure how long that has been out. It's actually kind of an interesting question. Google Web Server, Google uses for its online services. Doesn't say anything about the year. Google Platform, Google Web Server, that's all we get. That's it, all right. So that's a web server. And here's another picture of the same thing. Did we already see this picture? No, we didn't. So here's a picture for a web server. And then here, PHP interpreter would be the application server, and here would be MySQL, right? And so that's another way to sort of represent the same thing, which we saw here. Another way to represent the same thing, where we have the web server, the application server, and the database. All right, So we have the web server, the application server, and the database. And then we have the server, so we have web servers, and then the application servers. If I look for server scripting languages, I can find a list of server-side scripting languages. And so this would be the application server right here is going to be a piece of software which knows how to interpret these different programming languages. And so the most popular web server, application server, the most popular application server programming language is PHP. So that's the most popular. And then there are other application, application server programming languages. So PHP is the most popular. Then we also have ASP, which is the Microsoft flavor. ASP.NET, also Microsoft. Coldfusion, which is Adobe. And yeah, those are all the ones I want to mention right there. So those are application server languages for programming web pages to be dynamic, meaning they will change every time the page gets served up. And here's an example of what that code might look like for Coldfusion. If I wanted to query a database, right, I would do CF query, include some of these parameters, and then in my query. And I would have a SQL statement in between these two tags, like select all, select star, and give the query a name, and that would be the only attribute I would need to do. Or if I look for Coldfusion if, I can find a Coldfusion if statement. And here's what a Coldfusion if statement look like. See if set first name is Bono, so I just set a variable there. If first name is equal to Bono, still haven't found what I'm looking for, end if. So that would display, that code would show in the web page if the first name was Bono. So that's how you program an if statement, right? Here's an if-else statement, right? Set first name Ozzy. If first name is equal to Bono, show this. Otherwise, choose your own song then. Shows that because this doesn't evaluate first name is not equal to Bono, first name is equal to Ozzy. So this is what would show because CF if that's not true. So it does else, and then it ends the if statement. So that's server-side scripting, and we're looking at static versus dynamic web pages. So static web pages do not have an application server, and the pages don't change unless somebody manually changes it. The web programmer manually changes it. With a dynamic website, we have an application server, and the web page has programmable logic in it, which means that every time somebody asks for the web page, we can have different things happening on that page. So that's static versus dynamic websites. And we've learned what web servers are, we've learned what application servers are, and then databases. The most common databases used on the web would be like MySQL. And MySQL is the open source database, and that's this one here. We've already seen an image of it. MySQL, right? Open source database, the world's most popular open source database. Or people might also use SQL Server, which is the Microsoft flavor, or Oracle, which is a company that specializes in only databases. So that's what the databases be. And then the front end versus the back end of the website. When you hear people talk about that, this is the front end of the website. It's kind of like, what does it look like? And graphic designers are the ones who put together the front end of a website, right? And then the back end of the website, so my mom's got a back end on her website here. That doesn't sound so good. And if I log in, right, it lets me into the back end of the website. And I could go in here and I could change things. So I can manage property profiles, and I could edit any of these records, and I could delete the records. I could insert a new record. And then these records are the things that show up right here. So my mom's able to update her web page to show the different houses that she has available for sale simply by coming into the back side of her website and changing it. So this would be the front end, and this would be the back end, right? This is the back end. Back to main page. This is the back end where we're able to manage the website, And so programmers work on the back end, right? That'd be all the programming code. And this was written in Coldfusion. So that's a little bit about websites, about static versus dynamic, about web servers, application servers, and databases, and about the front end and the back end. You'll sometimes hear application servers you know, when people write programming code for that, you'll hear that called server-side scripting, server-side scripting. And then when people do, there's also something, there's two types of scripting basically. There's server-side scripting, in which case this code is going to execute and run on the web server application server. It's going to run on the application server remotely. So that's server-side scripting. And then there's also client-side scripting. And client-side scripting is writing code that will run on everybody's machine, right? So that runs on the client's machine. It's executed client-side. So in contrast to server-side scripts written in languages such as this, right? Client-side scripting would be like JavaScript. And JavaScript would, see JavaScript right here. JavaScript would allow us to have things happen on this web page while it's running on a client's machine, as opposed to having to go all the way to the server and come all the way back. So that would be JavaScript. HTML5 has some scripting to it too. Now you could do like regular expressions and things like that. All right, so that's a little bit about some of the terminology you hear when working with databases. Front end used to be more graphic heavy than it is today, but you could find website templates, right? If you're a graphic designer, and so there's templates out there where you could get templates for what you want the front end of your website to look like. So you could just buy these for $75 or whatever they cost. So that would be a quick way to get a front end for a website. Yeah, that's all I have to say about all that. All right, we're going to learn about wireframe mockups in the next video.